speaks first loses. I find sales an incredibly admirable skill. I watch our sales team. I'm just, thank God I don't have their job. But for some people,
Oh,
it just
I can
comes
do
so
it.
naturally.
Yeah, I can do it.
I've worked, before I did this, I worked in sales, and that's how I burnt out. But yeah, it's an interesting world, and now I work with sales teams, so.
I'm seeing the sun poke through outside, which is very exciting. That's not what I woke up to this morning.
Yes.
I love that.
She's actually in Biarritz today. Oh, yes. Okay.
He may have forgotten the mute.
It's always the biggest fear.
Oh, that's.
I'm just grateful there's no tractors going out the front of my house right now. Last week I was in a meeting and I just had like these tractors going down I've got like a private lane, and they were going down my private lane and they're just at the front of my house. I'm like, what are you doing? Please move on. It was so loud as well. So
yeah, it's not the time. We've had school holidays for the past 6 weeks. So yeah, and as much as you can sort of get the kids kind of watched and kept downstairs, it doesn't work. Like, they're in and out all day. It's like, and it's always the most inopportune times that they come in. Like, it's the one time in the day that you've got an external meeting or something like that. And I think it's most people expect a little bit of, kid interruption and stuff when you work from home anyway. But yeah, school holidays is definitely a challenge. They're back Tuesday, so it's a very exciting day, Tuesday, in my house. They'll be out the door. We've done none of the schoolwork that was meant to be done. We've done none of the reading. We're completely unprepared, so it's great.
Baptism by fire. They'll be fine.
Yeah, they'll be fine. They'll be fine. They're kids. They're resilient, right? They're fine.
It's all a learning experience.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's just preparing them, for real life.
All right. Well, it's 1 minute past, and it looks like we've had a few people join already. And we're recording. There we go. Okay, super. Well, welcome everybody, and thank you very much for joining us today, wherever you are. And if you're watching this on replay, thank you very much for your time. My name's Dutchie. I'm the Managing Director of Swag at Employment Hero. In my capacity, I look after the areas of our platform that help our clients build better teams. We look at recruitment, engagement, and retention. And so I'm particularly interested in the views today around well-being and making sure that your team are as engaged and as healthy in all respects as possible in order to help you build those great teams. We have some fantastic guests with us today. I'm very excited to hear their views. We only have an hour, so we're going to probably jump in pretty quickly. But before we do, I'll just mention the background for this conversation, which is the Future of Employee Wellbeing report that Employment Hero commissioned and undertook on a global basis in recent months. And in terms of that report, it was based on our own research of over 5,000 organizations globally, including over 1,000 in the UK alone. And so we'll be focusing on that component today. And of course, a big thematic and some of the big themes that came out of that is how our workplaces are evolving and being shaped by things such as remote work, artificial intelligence, and the changing dynamics that these elements bring. In looking at that, it's crucial to assess how these shifts in workplaces are impacting both our mental and physical health of ourselves and our teams. So as I said, we spoke to over 1,000 UK employees across various industries and roles and different working environments and types, from teachers and nurses to engineers and accountants. Responses came from all the sectors such as healthcare, education, retail, finance, and many, many more. We spoke to employees at all levels, from entry level to senior executive, and included both in-office and remote workers, offering a comprehensive view of the British workforce. Having completed all of that work, there were 3 things that really stood out. And I'd love for our panelists to be able to provide some insights around these today, but to just summarize those 3 core themes, we found that 57%, so well over half of respondents, rated their work-life balance as poor or average. The fact that fully remote workers were slightly better is also an interesting counterpoint to their in-office counterparts. But the fact that over half of respondents rated their work-life balance as poor or average was quite surprising. The second major thematic was that 65% of us have experienced burnout in the past 3 months, with Gen Z being the most affected, with 1/3 having taken leave due to stress, highlighting the need for conversations like this today to provide better workplace support. And then finally, as we know, financial stress is one of the major concerns right now, with 29% of employees, not surprisingly, naming the cost of living crisis as their primary source of anxiety. So these findings stress the importance of prioritizing employee well-being as a core part of any business strategy. And today we'll be exploring those insights and sharing some best practices and some historical experiences from some of our guests. And with that, I'd like to introduce our guests today. There's 4 of us, including my colleague Claire. But perhaps Christiana, do you want to kick off with a quick introduction of your background?
Yes, thank you, David. So hi, my name is Christiana Coker, and I'm the Group Head of People at Adam and Eve DDB, one of the largest UK creative agencies. I've been at Adam and Eve for over 2 years now, and I look after the people, culture and strategy for both our brands in the UK, as well as New York and Berlin. My background is creative industries, but I've delved into tech and event tech more specifically, as well as insights, etc. So I'm a big fan of data. So this report obviously was something that really caught my eye, because I always use data to drive every decision that we make within the business. So yeah, I'm really glad to be here talking about a topic that's really passionate to me as well.
Fantastic. And you're actually part of a very large global network. Is that right? How many employees does Omnicom have globally?
115,000, I would say. Yeah.
But of course, you work in a much smaller.
Look after about 500 of them.
Right. Okay. Terrific.
Yeah.
Fantastic. All right. Perhaps next we'll go to Sarah. Sarah, do you want to give us a little bit of a color of your background?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name's Sarah. I'm a senior consultant for a company called Great Place to Work, which is essentially what we try help our clients to become. So I essentially advise business and HR leaders on how to treat their people better. I've been there 7 years now, and I come from a background of organizational psychiatry and psychology, which is always a real mouthful to say. But it's basically around workplace mental health, looking at job stress and stressors, trying to create workplaces that are very conducive to people's well-being, which is what we're talking about today. So I am mostly sort of client-facing in my role, but I also advise our HR internally on how to do those things. So I try to practice what I preach.
Fantastic. And as we were chatting about earlier, like many people in this call, you've been fairly mobile in your career. You're from, where are you from originally, and where are you working now?
Yeah, I'm from Finland. I've lived in a couple of places around the world, in Germany and Bahrain mostly. I have then come to the UK to study, and my career has been based in London. But yeah, I think the Finnishness in terms of being for the 7th year now the sort of happiest place in the world in terms of social well-being, that is also, I guess, a factor that I sort of try to take in when talking to clients and having that kind of framework of what is well-being.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I'm sure we'll be drawing on that experience a little later on. Katie, another one whose accent perhaps belies their origins. Can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, thank you so much. So my name's Katie Maycock. I am the founder of a business called Just Wellbeing, and the sole purpose of this business is to work with individuals, leaders and organizations, helping them lay rock solid wellbeing foundation, so every single person can rock up as the best versions of themselves, or just simply rock up as a version of themselves that they want to. And a big part of what we do at Gist is talk about the impact that stress and burnout have on an organization and individuals. And one of the biggest reasons why I set up this business was I managed to burn out twice before the age of 27, and then came really, really close in my 30s. So it's something that I'm extremely passionate about. And when I went through my own burnout journey, I realized I can't be the only person struggling with this. And this was when I burnt out, it was also before the World Health Organization came out. So it was a diagnosable syndrome, and it was in Australia, where it was really not talked about and it was really vague. And so my goal is just to talk about it and bring light to it and what that means to an individual and how that impacts organizations. So that's what I'm doing. And I love it.
Fantastic. And living today in the UK?
Living today in the UK. I've been here for 6-7 years now.
Right, fantastic. And finally, my colleague, Claire, can you give us a little colour about your background and current role?
Yeah, absolutely. So I also, from my accent, you can tell I'm not originally from these parts. I am in the UK now, but originally from Australia. So I've been with Employment Hero now for just over 2 years. Maybe a bit of piece of furniture by this stage, I'm not sure. But yeah, I started off my journey with Employment Hero based with the Australian entity, covering product and technology over there. Made the move to the UK with my husband and my 2 small kids earlier in the year, and was lucky enough, you know, given the nature of our business, to be able to do that with Employment Hero also. So yeah, we've been here now since the start of the year. I'm a people business partner for the UK entity now, so supporting everybody over here, which has been fantastic. Prior to that, I was mainly in retail industry, which is probably very different to where we've ended up now, but you know, it's good experience across a couple of different industries to get a good feel for how these things work. But yeah, that's me. And like Dutchie said, yeah, we've worked together for a little while now. So very excited to be on this call, to be honest, with the other panelists. I was reading everyone's bios and I was really excited and really happy to be invited to join you guys today. So hopefully, yeah, we can have some really good chats.
Fantastic. And so those who aren't familiar with Employment Hero, we're actually approaching our 10th birthday. So 4 years definitely puts you as part of the furniture, Claire. Excellent. All right. Well, let's move on. Thank you very much for sharing all of that. We're going to jump straight in now to get into the topic of well-being and wellness at work. The first question is really around what constitutes wellness and the key elements that make up a healthy workplace. And I'll come to Christiana. I might come to you first, but I'm also particularly interested to hear the views around what we actually think wellness means, and perhaps that's as much an outcome thing as a diagnosis thing. So, with no background on that, Christiana, perhaps you can share with us your thoughts around what constitutes wellness and what do you think the key elements that make up wellness are? How does it manifest itself?
One of the things that people talk about is work-life balance, and I'm of the view that in order for someone to actually achieve work-life balance, both your work life and your personal life must be in harmony. So if you see it as a bit of a scale there, and oftentimes I think there's this notion that employers are responsible for only the work life, but actually what goes on in the individual's personal life does impact how they actually show up to work. So for me, I think about how, as an employer, how do I make sure that when people show up to work, that we're taking into consideration what may be happening within their personal life. And I would say that it means starting off by having meaningful conversations with people in terms of like what's going on for them, but also looking at what does wellness actually mean for the individuals. And, you know, someone who's a new mum, what wellness meant for me 7 months ago before I had my baby is completely different to what it means to me now. You know, prior to that, you know, I would work very, very late into the night because I enjoyed doing that. And that was what brought me meaning. And now I think, oh goodness, I can't do that anymore. So actually starting to shift the way that I work. And that means having a conversation with my boss around the way that I work and how I show up to work, and, you know, really making sure that they take into consideration that I can still do everything that I'm doing, but actually the way that I used to do it will just have to be slightly different. And for me, I think that's what it means to me to be well. It's meaning that I can still take on my responsibilities as a mother and as a mum and as I show up at home, but also the way that I show up at work doesn't really conflict with those two things. So that for me is what it means.
Yeah, I think that last point is something we definitely want to delve into a little later on, that wellness doesn't necessarily equate to compromise, but it's particularly interesting that what it means to individuals at different times in our lives. And as I think the eldest person on this call by far, I've been through probably more phases than many, but there you go. Katie, maybe come to you next in terms of, you know, how does wellness manifest? What does wellness look like? What are the key elements of wellness in your perspective, from your perspective?
So I think I really loved what Christiana said, and I think that I really want to piggyback on that. And I think wellness is something that is, you're a whole human being, right? We can't just go, what's well-being at work like, and what does well-being at home like, what's well-being at home? And I think the element of trying to separate the two is actually trying to split yourself into two, and that's not going to work. And I think if, you know, I know you've got some stats around stress and burnout, but you look at one of the biggest population of people that are burnt out right now in the workforce, it's working mums, as I'm piggybacking really hard on Christiana. And so I think when it comes to wellness, whenever you're working with somebody, you have to understand what that looks like to that person, because some people might not bring their problems to work. Some people might not share what's going on. It doesn't mean it's not impacting how they're showing up at work, and vice versa, how work is impacting them at home as well. So being able to have these really meaningful conversations and understanding what well-being and wellness looks to an individual is really important, and understanding all the different elements. Like I said, you're a whole human being. You could be somebody that is physically really, really well, mentally doing really well, but really struggling on the social standpoint. And what does that actually mean to your physical and mental well-being as well? And so I think as an organization, it's being, and as a human being, really understanding that you're a whole human being. Because a lot of the times when I talk about stress, everyone's like, I'm burnout in particular, and I won't go on a tangent about how burnout's not just a workplace issue, it's a whole human being issue. You've got to recognize you're a whole human being. If you're stressed at home, it's going to impact work, and vice versa.
Yeah, Katie, you touch on something there which we might come on to later. It's not part of our manifest, but I think it'll be really interesting what the responsibilities of us as employees, and for any employee, what their responsibilities are when in terms of managing wellness and burnout. But we might come back to that. In the meantime, Sarah, from your perspective, what do you think wellness means? How does it manifest, and what does it comprise?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Wellness and well-being, obviously, two mammoth terms. They're umbrella terms. They capture a lot of things within them. They are often used interchangeably. I'm of the school that really separates the two. I think of them as very different things. Wellness, for me, is more sort of lifestyle factors. It's practices to attain physical and mental health, whereas well-being is a much sort of broader, more holistic evaluation of how you are doing in a given domain of life, or holistically, as we've said. And obviously it has physical, psychological, social, financial, maybe spiritual, maybe environmental perspectives. There's lots of different sort of elements to it. In my role, I talk a lot about workplace well-being. So it's basically the outcome of how people feel like they are doing at work. Are they able to maximize their potential? Are they able to have the highest possible performance at work? So really it's about creating the conditions for people to thrive, and kind of what Katie said, rocking up as the best version of yourself every day, which is great. That's what it really is for me about, and for employers, it's about how to create those conditions for people to thrive.
Yeah, I guess it's really important that we acknowledge that there's many elements to this question as to why we ask it and how we try and promote it. But from a pure business commercial perspective, having a workforce that is not performing well because of stress, anxiety, the opposite of whatever wellness is actually a really critical business success factor. So we're not just here necessarily because we want to make our communities a better place, which is indeed a top priority. This just makes good business sense, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I always love the metaphor of the carrot and the stick. So there's the carrot, all the sort of great things you get by supporting people's well-being. They'll be showing more organizational citizenship behaviors, sort of a mouthful again to say. They'll just be willing to put in more work, have more loyalty to the company, be happier and healthier, that kind of thing. But then there's also the stick argument, all the potential sort of productivity loss and costs that you're facing if you don't take care of people's well-being, absenteeism, presenteeism, turnover, all these things that are associated with poor well-being.
Sarah, can you just expand on presentism? It's a term that some people either are not familiar with or perhaps misunderstand. What do you mean by presentism?
Presenteeism is basically the opposite of absenteeism or sickness absence, in that people are actually showing up to work, whether it's physically to an office or turning on their laptops at home, but they are not sort of giving it their best. They are a bit of a ghost. So they should probably not be at work. They are not well for whatever reason, whether it's because of anxiety or depression or burnout or another sort of physical condition, it's a huge sort of waste of productivity because they're actually not being their most productive.
Yeah, we might come back to that when we talk about remote work. But I just want to get Claire's view as perhaps the person who is most currently engaged most directly in the role of traditional HR, as we might think of it. Claire, wellness at work, and perhaps we start to expand this conversation to what is the role of HR professionals potentially as well. And I'll come back to the panel with an open question about leaders generally. But perhaps, Claire, you can touch on the role of HR professionals. So what's wellness to you, and what do you think the role of HR in promoting that is?
Yeah, look, it's a big question, to be honest, around wellness, I think, these days, because it definitely, I probably echo both, Christina and Katie, and it's quite a holistic now with wellness. Like, it really does, it encompasses a lot of different elements of your life. It's your wellness within your workplace, it's your wellness at home, and how those two work together. Like, for us in particular, I think at Employment Hero, we have, and for a lot of businesses now that operate with this kind of remote first or hybrid, I guess, model, we have this unique thing where our home is our office, let's say. So it's almost like how you get wellness within your home space has such a direct effect on your work, because the two are so connected. You're set up at your home, so anything that is happening in your personal life is 100% guaranteed to be affecting what is happening within your work life as well. It goes without saying that I think the biggest and you can see it within our report as well. I think it's 42% of people are uncomfortable having conversations about how they're doing and how they're feeling within the workplace, which was pretty alarming to me, to be honest, when I saw it, especially from a P&C and a HR perspective, because I think our role, getting onto that, I guess, Dutchy, like our role in P&C is really to try and create that environment where people feel comfortable to be able to speak about how they're doing, how they're feeling, where they need support, and that's probably where that piece is missing for a lot of employees and employers now, is around how we work with that. So I guess the role of P&C, especially in the wellness space now, is to really be a driver of having those conversations and be able to help leaders, feel comfortable to have those conversations with their employees, know how to create environments where their employees are feeling comfortable to come and have those conversations, and really having that transparency in the company around the fact that, there's no stigma around this stuff. Like, you're welcome to come and speak to us about things that are happening within your life. Like, we are here to help. Like, our mission is to make employment, better and easier for everybody. And part of that is this wellness piece as well. It's being able to, provide a space for people, regardless of what they're going through, what their situation is, whether it is returning mums back into the workforce, whether it is financial, stresses, to be able to come and speak to your employer about that and work on a different solution to how they can improve their well-being and their wellness.
Yeah, and I want to come back to the panel with an open question about leadership's role generally. But Claire, in our organisation, we actually often refer to our people and culture team as our performance team. What do you think that reflects in terms of the role of people and culture and HR generally?
So I guess it's an interesting one, that one, Dutchy, to be honest. So we are obviously, people and culture, I think, historically has been seen as being like the driver of kind of culture. I think for a business like ours, we have, amazing founders that created our culture, and it is there and it's embedded. So I guess for us to make that slight shift to be more, I guess, around performance rather than us being that cultural driver, performance is 100% affected by how people are feeling and how people are living their lives. So that it's all part of it, I think. Like, we have, we encourage our leaders to have, regular one-to-one catch-ups with their team individually. So it gives that opportunity, I guess, to, not only discuss performance pieces and career development opportunities and things like that, but also to create that safe space and to try and get that relationship going where people can use that to talk about as well, to talk about things that are happening within their life. So I think it's kind of, it's kind of comes together, I guess, in that way, where, well-being does impact performance as it is. So I think that's always going to be spoken about in the same way. I mean,
ultimately, we want our teams to be well, we want them to be happy, we want them to be content. But one 100%. Of the reasons we want that is because we want high-performing teams. And that was really the point that I think has drawn out in our organisation. An
Yeah,
open
100%. You want people to feel fulfilled in their role as well, and make people feel like they are succeeding and they are performing. So whatever support they need at the time, whatever we can give them is what we'd encourage those conversations to be around.
Yeah, fantastic. One thing I forgot to mention at the outset is that we do have the Q&A option here today. I noticed there's a little bit of chat going on, but also there's a button at the bottom of your Zoom. I think most people are familiar with how Zoom works these days with a Q&A. We will be taking questions. We'll be saving some time at the end to answer them, but feel free to pop them in as we go, and we'll blend them into the conversation. Actually, Katie, I said that I'd make this an open question, but I noticed in your background you do work a lot with leadership teams around their getting their stuff together in their organizations. How do you think, what do you think the role of leadership is in terms of setting the scene or enabling? And then perhaps I'll come on to the question for the others around the employee responsibility, but what does leadership need to do around wellness?
So that's a really, really important question. One of the biggest things that I do with organizations is looking at the top-down approach. I'm just going to go on a slight tangent, but I'm going to come back, I promise. One of the biggest dilemmas that you might have in an organization is you have a really robust wellbeing strategy that the people and culture team have created. If the leadership team and the C-suite doesn't get bought into, or the business strategy doesn't align with that, it's going to be really hard for the leaders to be able to execute that wellbeing strategy, simply because if you've got one directive of the people and culture and the wellbeing strategy going, we need to create space for people to be able to bring their wellbeing or their wellness issues to the conversation. But then you've also got really high targets, which a lot of businesses are in right now, especially the last 4 years. Business has been quite challenging for a lot of organizations. And performance has been dipping because people are more stressed than they have been previously. It does become quite difficult for leaders. And something that I have been doing is, in particular, the last year and 18 months maybe, is looking at stress and burnout of leaders. What we're finding is that there is a really high percentage of leaders, I think it's like 60% of people leaders right now, are feeling burnt out and stressed as well. So if you have a burnt out and stressed leader, it's going to be really difficult for them to create space or even to be aware of what's going on within their team. But coming back to your actual question, because I know that was a slight tangent and I do apologize, but the role of leaders when it comes to wellness and those, and being able to drive that performance, because that's essentially their role. And if if people are not feeling great, they're not going to perform at a high level. And leaders need to be able to have those conversations. I know, Claire, you were talking about having those one-on-one conversations, encouraging those conversations, but I would really want people, whoever in this room, to really think about what's happening outside of those one-on-one relationships. Those leaders need to build those relationships on a daily basis, so people do feel comfortable coming to them, having those conversations. But on the other side, if you're an organization, looking at your leaders and the resources they need to make sure that they can do their job effectively, making sure they're not burnt out, they're not overly stressed. One of the biggest signs of burnout is apathy. And that's not because somebody doesn't care. That just means they don't have the capacity to care. So if you have an apathetic leader and you're asking them to take, on board their team's wellness, they don't have a well to sort of draw from to be able to do that with. So leaders are incredibly important when we're driving these wellbeing strategies, these wellness strategies, building these relationships, creating psychological safe workplaces, but making sure that everything's sort of aligned with that. And it does come back down to culture. And I think, Claire, you were talking about how, leading, you guys going from leading the culture and leading into performance. Performance is a massive part of culture. If you want a high performing team and a high performing culture, you need to make sure that you're working that into the messaging, the communications, the leadership, and wellness, essentially, because that's really important. So I know I went on a tangent, so I'll stop talking now.
No, that's fine. I appreciate that. Thanks for that. And I think moving a little bit in terms of strategies, Christiana, in terms of the you work in a very large organization, you work within a relatively smaller team. What are some of the strategies at a very practical level that you've seen successful in terms of trying to address some of the issues that we've raised so far?
And it's interesting just bringing this back into performance, one of the biggest things that I do with my team is setting expectations and setting the clear directions. So we talk about OKRs, which is objectives and key results. So at the start of the year, we always go, right, here are the things that we want to actually achieve as a team and for our business. We get that signed off by our CEO, and who says, yep, that's great. This is exactly the direction I want, HR to kind of impact the business. And then within the team, we then ask people, okay, who wants to take on one specific aspect of the OKRs? And then we check in regularly. Because I think oftentimes what I find that what causes burnout is when people just don't have a sense of direction and they don't know what they're supposed to be achieving. You're all there, you feel like a cog in the machine. So actually thinking that doing that is one thing. And then to speak to something that Katie talked about, the other one is around role modeling as leaders as well. So we have quite an extensive wellbeing package actually. And the reason why we've done that is because we know that there are certain access to things that employees may struggle with. So we want to make sure that within the organization is one thing that they don't worry about. So we have a GP that comes into our office once a week who acts like a normal GP, who can also give you a prescription. We have a physiotherapist that comes in. Our employees have access to psychiatrists and psychotherapists that can help them. And there's also like the EAP program. We have access to financial well-being individuals as well who can help you out. So we just want to make sure that if there's anything that they're kind of going through, the one thing that going through in their personal life, we want to make sure that we tailor all of our well-being packages to be able to support them at different stages of their lives. And last year as well, we improved our maternity packages, and that was based off of a paper that I'd written and presented to our CEO to say, listen, we are losing highly talented female individuals to our competitors. And one of the reasons that they do that is because our maternity packages is awful. Well, it wasn't great. And we thought, well, actually, if we make this better, we can make sure that when women are returning to work or even leaving to go on maternity leave, the one thing that we don't want them to worry about is their finances. So we've improved our package to allow people to just go off on maternity leave and not have to worry. But even when they're coming back to work as well, we've implemented such things as flexible return, where you can work 4 days a week, but you will still get paid for a full 5 days. So those are the type of things that we look at to go, okay, at the different stages of individuals' lives, what are the things that we can actually put in place? And we're quite fortunate as well that our leaders are quite open and vulnerable about their own type of mental health struggles. And I think that makes it a lot easier for employees to go, hey, this is what I'm going through right now. And as a leader, you can resonate and say, okay, listen, there is the psychiatrist that if you want to speak to them further about this, because actually my capacity to be able to help you and support you on this particular issue is slightly limited. And employees know that they can reach out confidentially and actually have that connection with someone outside of the organization too.
Yeah, right. Okay, so confidentiality, comfort, being comfortable from the employee's perspective. I said we'd come back to this, but the employee's responsibility in managing this, and perhaps Sarah, I'll come to you on that as an organizational psychologist in a moment. I just wanted to ask you, Christiana, the point you raised about financial anxiety, financial stress. It's something that I hear people talk about a lot, and it's something that we're being asked how do I help as an employer address this. From your perspective, at a really granular basis, what role do you think an organization, an employer, a company, a business has in helping employees manage their financial affairs? I mean, obviously, the employer is the source of most people's income, should be. But does it extend beyond that? How do you navigate that as an employer? Where does my role start and stop in that area?
I think this is the challenge. It's quite challenging for businesses because obviously you're quite limited to based on what you can actually do. So one of the things we try to do is ensure that we have regular financial reviews. We're always checking to see whether or not we are competitive in the market. So annually we do a salary survey to make sure that actually are we paying our people enough. In that as well, we also look at the roles that people are doing. Does that need to shift and does that need to change? The one thing that we do also make sure that we try to offer is financial advice from an independent source. But when employees have been struggling, we have been known to help them in different different ways. So we've had employees say to us, oh, I want to buy a house. Can you please help me? And we're quite fortunate in the position that we can actually go, okay, yes, we can help you with this. And these are the things that practically we can actually do. I think as an employer, it's important to be honest about what you can do. And of course, we've had people leave because actually their expectation from a financial compensation is one that we can't meet. However, there's somebody else who can meet that. So we have to make decisions to allow people to be able to move on because their lifestyle and what we're able to support with, it's very limited.
Yeah, okay. The reason I ask is we're just currently looking in my area about how much we can and how much we should be trying to support employers, particularly the small and medium-sized businesses that we typically support, how much we can do to help them with their employees raise their basic financial literacy. And I think there's an element of every team that's going to be, it's actually not a question of income, it's probably as much a question of expenditure. And helping people understand that is a much bigger problem than I ever understood it to be until recent years. So that's something that we're particularly interested in. Sarah, the role of it, we've talked a little bit about leadership and the P&C HR teams. What's the responsibility of employees in managing and escalating well-being and wellness issues?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the million-dollar question always, whose responsibility is well-being in organizations? And I guess the sort of short answer is that it's very much a shared responsibility. And I would echo everything that's been said so far by Katie and Christiana. As with most things, leadership sets the tone for pretty much everything. How sort of sustainably impactful or effective are things going to be if they're not driven from the top or endorsed from the top? Probably not very. That's the symbolic aspect, but then role modeling, absolutely. There's a personal element there as well. Absolutely. If leaders are more vulnerable, share more, talk more about these things, it's going to send a very powerful message that you can and you should as well. And it's okay to be open and honest, and people should safeguard their own well-being, self-care, all these things. Then a massive, sorry.
No, sorry, go ahead.
Another sort of tier of the organization that has huge responsibility, huge power here is frontline managers, or people, sort of immediate people managers. They are the touch point between the sort of wider culture, senior leadership, and individual employees' sort of well-being experience. They can very much make or break that by how proactive they are, how much of a rapport they've built with their people. Do they know sort of signs and symptoms to look out for? Do they know how to signpost and support people? They very much determine that experience for individuals. Often, then again, they do tend to be the most stressed group. That our research shows that frontline managers specifically do tend to report the highest levels of stress in our population study. I mean, they are literally sandwiched between the sort of tier below and the tiers above. They are being bombarded by demands on both sides. So we put all this responsibility on them to take care of people's well-being, but who's taking care of theirs? The tiers above, hopefully, but I don't know if that happens very much. They should definitely be taking care of their own responsibility. And I guess that's where the employee responsibility comes in. Of course, everyone has agency and responsibility for their own well-being. So in that sense, it's up to you to figure out the best way of going about your role and to speak up if you are struggling. But then again, that needs to be within a culture that's driven from the top that would allow that and sort of encourage that. So shared responsibility at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point you raise about who's supporting the supporters and that supervisor level, that team leader responsibility. What I take away from that is perhaps as organizations that we often promote people from being an individual contributor to being a supervisor, a manager, those frontline managers, as you call them, without really necessarily thinking about what they need in order to adapt to their greater responsibility. So is that something you've spent some time looking at in terms of how to train and support people as they move their careers up the ladder?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a well-documented phenomenon. People that show strong technical skills in something, let's say sales, often get promoted to a team leader without any sort of people management background or training or knowledge or experience. So absolutely, I'd say one of the kind of best things an organization can do, I guess, for well-being generally, is to make sure that anyone who's going into a role that has people management responsibilities gets some training around people management skills, well-being, stress monitoring, stress management, all these sorts of things, which we know are going to make a big impact later on, probably one of the biggest things. So absolutely, I do think there's a gap there and a big opportunity as well.
Sticking with that point about using sales as the example, I know from having seen it in various organizations, when a salesperson gets promoted to being a team lead, all the training seems to focus on how do I get the most out of the team I'm now managing? What's the responsibility? What's the accountability? But there's very little put on, is this person that I'm managing sustainable, and are they going to deliver their best work for all the areas we've talked about? One thing I just want you to expand on, you mentioned signposting a little earlier. Signposting. What do you mean by that, and what how does that help?
Yeah, I mean, kind of thinking about more broadly, what is the role of a people manager? Let's say if they do manage someone who is struggling with a mental health issue, for example, there's sometimes maybe a temptation for that line manager to act as a diagnostician or a therapist, and of course that's not their role. They're not expected to be able to actually diagnose conditions or to sort of give direct sort of counseling or anything like that. What they can do is maybe spot some signs, hopefully have an open conversation, listen actively, be compassionate, and then signpost them, as in guide them, direct them to the right professional or personal support. So hopefully an organization has some internal resources. They might have an occupational health team, HR, they might have EAPs, and they might have mental health first aiders, mental health champions, something like that. External ones as well, people's own GPs, you can get referred for psychiatric services. There's lots of great charities that can help, or even just encouraging to speak to someone at home, a loved one, friend, family member, these sorts of things. So signposting on some more kind of appropriate support.
That's fantastic advice, because again, just reflecting on the community around Employment Hero, most of our businesses employ under 200. In fact, most businesses around the world employ less than 200 people. Most of the clients of Employment Hero employ around about 40 to 50 employees. They won't necessarily have those dedicated HR and health professionals. So I think what I'm hearing you say is, even as a business owner, I've got no background in wellness or well-being. That ability to be able to encourage someone to seek help, whether it be physical or mental health, from an appropriate professional, you're saying is actually quite a useful solution. You don't have to have the answers in your organization. Most organizations aren't big enough to have it. So being able to encourage that person to reach out to the right people. Yeah,
absolutely. And all of that, or most of that, so takes no budget, really. It's just about line managers being compassionate and having a bit of empathy and be willing to have a conversation, making the time and space to have that conversation. And then most of those resources are probably external, or there might be people internally who have lived experience, or maybe they have some sort of mental health related qualifications who would be well placed to have a further conversation.
So being aware and alert to the signs, and then, as you say, signposting them, guiding them, directing them to the best solution. All right.
And also being very aware of where that responsibility ends. So not trying to overstep, not trying to diagnose, not trying to give direct advice, because often that can be quite a risky business. So knowing sort of where your responsibility starts and ends, I think is really important as well.
Yeah. All right, thanks for that. I'm going to move the conversation on to perhaps one of the big buckets around the future of employment and well-being, which is, of course, remote hybrid work. Claire, I'm coming to you as a P&C team member in a remote first, wholly remote.
Yeah.
We've got 1,500 employees. I think in the UK now we have just over 100. Is that right? How does
I think it's about 142 at my last count, but which has expanded. It's basically doubled in the last 12 months. So it's so as a remote first organization, you've got teams spread across the world. In fact, just one anecdote from our part of the world is that some of our team have actually moved countries since they joined us, and so we have people in about a dozen different Asian countries over on this side. I think it's similar, although slightly smaller numbers in terms of European presence. Yeah.
How does wellness work in an organization where they don't show up to the office every day?
Yeah, look, it's a really unique and really tricky environment, to be honest. You know, remote work brings so much benefit. I mean, you know, just piggybacking off what Christina said earlier about being a mum, like, I mean, I'm a mum, and, you know, for me to be able to work remotely and have flexibility and things like that is just such a game changer for my personal wellness. But it is, you know, while it does bring so many benefits, you know, it brings, you know, reduces financial stresses, reduces, you know, commuting time, all of this sort of stuff. There's also, you know, issues, I guess, that you face around people feeling maybe a bit disconnected, people feeling a little bit isolated. And I guess working on that's just a particular challenge that we will face in a remote workforce always, is how you, I guess, foster those relationships within your organization while people are not working in an office together.
So here's the question I've got for you, because the report, just bringing it back to the report, I don't actually have the exact number in front of me, but it was quite
I've got
clear
it next to me, so I can probably find it for you if you need it.
Right. So in terms of we mentioned at the top that 67% of people are experiencing their work experience at the moment as poor or average, but it was slightly better, and I don't have the slightly better for people who work remotely and hybrid. How do we explain that? Is that should every organization go remote tomorrow? Like, what are the drivers of that? You've touched on it, but I really want to try and focus on that. Why is there that difference?
Yeah, look, I think it's not probably reasonable for every employer and every workforce to be able to go 100% remote. It is 57% compared to, I think it's 44% of hybrid and 38% of in office. Are you statistics you were looking for before?
That's quite a big difference.
It is quite a big difference. And I do think it comes down to a number of things. And it is, no doubt, like everyone was saying, like where you are at in your life. Like if you're, someone who is quite, who is a bit younger, who's got financial stresses and things like that, being able to work remotely or even just having flexibility in your life can free up some of those finances for you around commuting, around parking, around traveling in and out of work, buying lunches every day when you're out. For, coffees is when you add up the amount of money you spend on coffee per year, it's actually quite shocking. For working parents, it makes it a lot easier. Your well-being is it's eased because you don't you're not having to struggle with that commute, trying to get your kids out the door, missing time with your family and things like that, because you are having to, try and get into an office. You're in, even for people that are having different things like mental health issues and things like that, you're set up within your home to be able to work. It's a comfortable place for you to be able to work. It will encourage you to be able to get online, whereas maybe you'd be having days where you couldn't do that because you're having to go into an office and face to face. So I think that's where there's a really big amount of wellness that comes with that. Even the work-life balance, it's you're not having to do that time in the morning where you're commuting into the office and things, so you can then get your time back to do your fitness, do your exercise, do your hobby, things like that kind of really encourages that work-life balance. There's a lot of positives to it.
Of course, as soon as we move on to this topic, the questions start flooding in. A lot of these questions are relating to the practicalities of managing remote. I don't think that's the purpose of today's conversation. What I will say is in the second or third week of September, we are running a webinar specifically around managing remote and recruiting remotely. So keep an eye out. You'll be able to download that conversation. But coming back to maybe the broader panel about remote, you mentioned, Claire, about the disconnection, and I'd be interested in, I'll let anyone speak up that's rather than press somebody, but in terms of that disconnection, we know it's a reality of remote work, those wonderful water cooler moments, that connectivity that comes from just being in the presence of your teammates. How big an impact is that having on the workforce, the lack of that? Does anyone have any particular views around the challenges of remote work and well-being and wellness?
I'll just jump in real quickly, Dutchy, there. I know that you like a little term, and I heard a term the other day that was remotiness, which is like remote loneliness. So I thought you might like that one. Just throwing that one out there for you.
How big a problem? How big a problem is remotiness, and what are some of the strategies that we need to use to overcome it? And I have very strong views on this, so don't give me blank space. Katie, come on.
I was just unmuting myself. I think so. I know that you're going to be doing something in regards to remote leadership, which is really important. I think the complexity that comes with remote work is that there is that disconnect. As human beings, we do like to be connected to people, and although there's the internet, we've got Zoom, we've got phones, and we can connect, but it's very different than when you're in human form. Something that I do think that this is a potential problem, especially for the younger generation, although it does free up the finances part, but there is a part where are they developing new skills from, their colleagues, all that kind of stuff being in the workforce. I do believe in remote working. I think it is actually a really positive thing. I think companies have to be very creative in how they build that connection with their teams, how leaders are able to build the support for their teams. Because something that you do lose when you are remote working, and I know we're talking about stress and burnout, is, and I know, Sarah, you were talking about the signs and symptoms. It's harder to spot the signs and symptoms when it comes from a physical and a mental standpoint. When it comes to stress and burnout, the only thing you're going to really have is maybe a drop in performance, which is a sign of overstress and burnout as well. So that's something that you've got to think about. But I think the strategies that you have to put in place is making sure that you are spending more time trying to connect, building those relationships. Even if you have once a quarter, you get everyone together, and it doesn't have to be in a work, you know, in an office or anything like that, but having those relationships, doing something that's engaging with the team so they can build those relationships. You get to know those people a bit better, because there is a lack of relationship building when you work remote, fully remote. So I think that's some things that you've really got to think about is, when can you get everyone in the room? When can you get everyone to connect? And how are you building those relationships? Because that's important.
Yeah, fantastic. Christiana and Sarah, do you have anything to add around that, in terms of that relationship building, that connectivity?
Yeah, I mean, I
So,
think,
oh, sorry,
oh,
please.
go for it.
Christiana, you're
Well, I was just gonna
alphabetically
say,
first.
oh yeah, that's true. Go
So
for it.
it's so interesting because when I first joined my organization, it was at a time when our CEO, my second day actually, our CEO stood up and basically said everyone has to come in 4 days a week, and we called it 4 and flex within our industry, and it just caused so much outrage. And it's like here's me day 2 having to then write about why it's important and why we should all come in. And for me, as someone who'd always worked remotely, I actually, especially when you're new to an organization, and doing the role that I did in HR, it really served me well to be in person, and it really served me well for our people to be in person as well. And I remember having to speak to some managers who were very upset about it. And I sat down and I said to him, we've just had a presentation. And if you were working remotely, you would not have seen what I saw, which was a member of your team in the corner crying and really upset about something that we had just seen. You would not have seen somebody else's reaction to something that was actually happening. Or you would not have seen last night in the evening me talking to an employee who came down to grab a croissant on my desk about the challenges that she was facing with her work, and how she wanted some help with how to talk to her manager about how she should change the things that she does. Now, I'm not saying that being fully remote or being fully in person is the answer, but I did note that in your survey as well, that there was in some areas that people who were actually fully remote weren't as happy. There was some imbalance there as well in terms of their happiness and their quality of life. I think it's about learning to strike the balance, and I think especially when you're a young person starting into an organization, there's so much that you pick up by osmosis, by just watching the people around you, by talking to them, by body language as well. And it's interesting you talked about loneliness as well. I think actually being remote has made us more lonely, because if you think about it, there is still those water cooler moments where you can walk to someone and just go, hey, what are you doing and what are you working on, and just learning from them. Whereas actually I find when I was working remote, I couldn't, once I shut my laptop off, I don't even want to have that 5 minutes of what are you up to this weekend, what are you doing, because I've spent so much time on my screen that the last thing I want to do is spend more time on the screen. And I thought that was such a shame, and it was one of the things that I actually loved about being back in the office and talking to people and just getting to know them. And I actually found that for a lot of people as well, being in the office improved our resilience and actually improved our emotional regulation. And I say that because when you've been fully remote and then suddenly you're thrown back into going into the office, when someone bumps you on a train and they barge into you, your reaction to that is like maybe 10 times what it would have been if you're just used to that every single day. You go, oh, well, they're just having a bad day, that's what it is. But when you've been fully remote, you just don't know how to react, because suddenly you're being put in this environment that feels completely alien, but for somebody else going in and commuting day to day, it's normal. So I think for a lot of people, and my team would scream at me because they've said to me, if you make me come in 5 days a week, I quit. So that's fine.
Yeah.
But that that's my view, which is quite controversial for a lot of people who believe in remote first. But yeah, that's how I feel about it.
Sarah, I can't go on without giving you an opportunity to talk about wellness in a remote environment.
Yeah, I mean, I also have mixed feelings on the topic. I think remote working is a double-edged sword. It's definitely had both positive and negative consequences, and it depends on your role and your sort of life living situation as to which way that balance fits. Work-life balance, even, I think it has helped a lot for especially people with families, with children, that juggle those tasks. But then again, it's also causes massive blurring between home and life. So it's also hindered work-life balance in that respect. Maybe it takes a lot more discipline to switch off for some people. It's helped maybe create opportunities for self-care in the day-to-day and financially make those weekly savings, as we've said. But then probably the biggest way in that it's depleted well-being is that social connection piece. Interpersonal relationships is a huge driver of well-being in the workplace. It's one of our 5 dimensions of well-being at work in our well-being model. Not having that sense of, or easy sense of, let's say, everyday sort of community and building rapport and social connection. Those water cooler moments that we've been saying, often those interactions are kind of what makes work fun, but then also the collaboration piece, innovation, all those things are much more difficult, I guess, if people are in a remote setup. So social connection is possible, but it's just a lot more sort of intentional. It's a lot more effortful. You have to sort of build those opportunities. You might have to have more kind of unstructured meetings or coffee moments. People can just sort of drop into certain meetings. It can be done. I think a lot of us did do it during years of lockdown, where we had to think of all the fun ways of quizzes, ways to sort of have that sense of camaraderie virtually, but it just takes a lot of effort to sustain that.
Yeah.
Ultimately, there's no one size fits all. It will depend on business needs and an organization sort of structure as to what works best. Often, I do think a hybrid setup is the best. People also have very different situations, sort of life stages, individual preferences. Yes, the sort of younger generation, the ones sort of entering the workforce, they probably miss out on the most, but
Yeah.
it really depends.
Sarah, you mentioned the 5 principles. You mentioned that connectivity was one of the 5 principles. What can you expect? What are the 5 principles? Is that something your organization has built?
Yeah, so that's our well-being model. So the 5 kind of dimensions or drivers that impact an employee's sense of well-being the most. It's psychological safety, it's job design and fulfillment, it's work-life balance, interpersonal relationships, and then mental, physical, and financial health, which is what I call wellness, that one dimension.
Fantastic. Is that publicly available, or is that proprietary to you? Where can people find it? Is there a site?
Yeah, on our website, there's a section around employee wellbeing services. A great place to work, UK.
Yeah, fantastic. Look, I do want to save a few minutes. I want to go around the table as we draw up and ask everyone for their number one tip in terms of practical advice around helping and promoting a wellness amongst your workforce. I'm just going to give you my 2 thoughts on remote work, and I'll try and keep it to 2 thoughts only. The first is, I think it's horses for courses. There is not going to be a world where we only have remote or only have office or only have hybrid. I think organizations will find what works best for them, and as a consequence, they'll build the teams that work best in those environments by attracting and retaining the people who want to work in that environment. The second thing, which is the most important, and we'll go into a lot of detail in our webinar in September, is around the design with intention and deliberate design. So many people underestimate how much effort, and Claire, as a P&C person, you know how much effort goes into creating the right environment, whether it's in person in an office, and if you only need to look at the fit out, the office fit out industry to know that that is a enormous investment that business has made, right through to planned events. If you use that same level of resources and intentionality and deliberate design in designing your remote workforce, I think you'll find that you can have a very successful business. But again, we'll go into that in more detail in September. So just with a few minutes to go, I'll start with Christiana. Do you want to go first? If there's one, at least you don't get to get yours stolen. Number one piece of advice or practical tip for people looking to enhance wellness in the workplace?
I would say it's not a one size fits all. So you need to listen to your employees and understand what's really important to them. Obviously, there'll be budget constraints. So look at what's the most important and let your budget and let that guide you, and then you utilize your budget in the right way as well. That's what I would say.
Okay, so listening and being aware of your workforce. Sarah, I'm just going across my screen here. So Sarah.
Yeah, so we actually ask the employees of our clients. We have an open-ended well-being question that reads, what's the single most valuable way for your employer to support your personal well-being? And a theme that we've seen in the top sort of 2 themes in the past few years is people management. So back to those frontline managers, just having line managers check in more and have those open conversations. It takes no budget. It's such an easy thing to do. But often I think organizations overcomplicate well-being, or they focus too much on the things that sort of look good or sound good, or more sort of PR measures in a way that can come across a bit gimmicky or as token gestures. But just getting the really simple things right, which is people management, which is checking in, listening actively, all those things, which can then have lots of sort of positive spillover effect. I think I'd invest in the people managers.
That would probably be mine. And there is one feature within the Employment Hero platform, which we haven't talked a lot about, but every manager can set up to have either a work anniversary notification or a birthday notification of their entire team. So the night before, the day before someone's work anniversary or birthday, you get a notification. And it means so much, Sarah, when that manager acknowledges your birthday or your work anniversary, even without any financial reward, a zero financial investment. So it's a great tip. Appreciate that. Katie, your number 1 tip, if it hasn't already been taken?
It hasn't, which was very helpful. So I'm going to make it into a tiered one. Align your wellbeing strategy with your business strategy and get your leaders to champion the wellbeing strategy. They have to be championing it, because if it's not, it's going to go on deaf ears. So that would be my biggest tip.
Fantastic. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. And very concise. And Claire, lucky last.
Lucky last. So thinking about some alternatives to what everybody else has said, because I do echo everything that everyone said. I think, active listening, leadership, all of it is incredibly important. Something that we probably haven't touched on, I think that is really fundamental to wellbeing as well, is recognition. So having that, it's something that we've really tried to really push at Employment Hero as well. We have a lot of avenues for people to be able to, recognize teammates, shout their teammates out, shout their teams out for all the good work they're doing. Like it goes like, it's a small thing, like you were saying, Dutchie, around the anniversaries. It's a small thing, but it goes a really long way to, for someone who is feeling stressed or is feeling flat, to get a bit of a shout out from your team or a bit of recognition from your manager. It's massive for your well-being. So that would probably be mine.
And that shout out facility in Employment Hero, I love it when it's across teams, when it's like recognition from somebody on the other side of the world or the other side of the business saying, this person jumped in and helped out. They didn't have to. I really appreciate it. They did a great job. So that's fantastic. All right. Well, thank you very much. We are out of time. I think we got about halfway through the topics we wanted to cover, but that's the nature of these. Thank you all very much for joining us and sharing your views. And on the screen now are some areas in which, if you want to continue the conversation or ask any questions of any of our speakers today directly, please don't hesitate to get in touch with them. This pack and the recording, and indeed, I believe the access to the full report, is going to be mailed out to all participants who registered to join us today. So if you're looking for any of these links, they'll be in that pack, as well as the report itself. So once again, thank you very much to each of you for joining us. And I think with that, I'll wrap it up and we'll say goodbye. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks all.
Thank you.